Hi there. My name is Wendy Wood, and I teach at the University of Southern California. I think I'm the first person speaking at this conference, so let me welcome you. And let me thank the people who organized this event, because I think it's going to be really an interesting conference. So we were given 3 questions to answer. And in order to do so, I need to pull up some slides. So give me a minute and let me share my screen. My answer to these questions has to do with habit, how we form and change habits. So the first question we were asked is, why does most behavior change fail? Why aren't we successful? And in a way, that's not really true, because most behavior change is successful initially. You can see in the gray bar, people's initial attempts to lose weight in a study conducted in 2014. They were initially, you can see the red and the blue lines going down. People initially lost quite a bit of weight in this particular intervention. But then over time, their weight readjusted back pretty much to where they started. So why do we think this happens? Well, our explanations for why we're unsuccessful at changing our behavior in the long run has to do with personal responsibility. 58% of Americans think that obesity is individuals' personal responsibility and that we should be losing weight through our own diet and exercise efforts. People who are obese even and have tried to lose weight, they think the biggest barrier is them, their lack of success, their lack of willpower to be able to follow through and diet and exercise. So keep this in mind. We tend to focus on willpower in our explanations of why we're successful or not in changing our behavior. But willpower is only sometimes needed. If you're doing something once or a few times for a short period of time, say you start an exercise program, or you don't do it that often, you only go once in a while, then your decision to exercise and your willpower to make that decision happen in going to the gym is really important. But once you start exercising more often in the same context, our decisions and our willpower become much less important. And there's a lot of research data showing that exercise habits are really what get people to go to the gym consistently over time. So our decisions are important to begin with when we're starting a behavior or doing something only occasionally, doing something that's a one-off, like joining a retirement program. Then our decisions and willpower are very important. But for repeated actions, the way people actually are successful at doing these things is they form habits. And those habits are what enables them to persist. So how much of our behavior is a habit like this? Well, that was one of the first questions we started with in my research on this topic. And you can't ask people how much of your behavior is habitual. Instead, what we did is we contacted people each hour for several days, and we asked them, what are you thinking about? What are you doing? And how often have you done this in the past? What we found is that for 43% of the times that we contacted people, they were repeating what they had done pretty much every day in that context. And they were thinking about something other than what they were doing. And that's really interesting because it means that people are responding automatically without thinking, without making decisions. And it didn't matter what kind of behavior people were doing. It didn't matter if they were cooking, if they're studying, if they're driving a car, if they're in the shower. 43% of the time, they're doing this without making decisions, exerting willpower about what they're doing. Why? You might wonder, why do we have this sort of a structure where we're doing things and not thinking? Well, our brains have many systems. We think they're a single unified whole, that they're us, right? They help us, they're the neural part of us. But instead, human brains evolved in sort of fits and starts across evolutionary history. And we have many systems as a result. They generally work together, but not always. So we have some systems that are really designed for thinking, deciding to act, exerting effort to do something. And we have other systems, sensory motor system is one name that's given, for repeating actions. And this involves the putamen, the basal ganglia. That is activated when we're doing things that we've done repeatedly in the past. So the next question that we were asked is, what needs to happen for behavior change to be sustained? And there's great data on this. When you're in the right context, you do things that are healthy and beneficial for you. People who live within a mile of a park are 4 times more likely to visit it, and they have over a third more exercise sessions each week. Using bike trails, every quarter mile you're further away from a bike trail, you're half as likely to use it. Distance to trails is overall negatively related to the minutes people spend walking and cycling. Obesity rates, they're higher in places that are called food swamps, where there's lots of fast food, not a whole lot of fresh food. And there's more bike riding in cities that have more bike lanes. You build bike lanes and people eventually start to use them. So what sustains behavior change is very much the context in which we live. One of my favorite demonstrations of this comes from a data analytics study that tracked 7.5 million cell phones to paid gymnasiums, paid fitness centers across several months. Now they're actually tracking people, obviously, and they're seeing how far people go to fitness centers. And what they found was that this is a paid fitness center, and these are 2 cell phones, 2 people traveling there. What these researchers found is that if you travel 3.5 miles on average, 3.6 actually, on average, to a paid fitness center, you go 5 times a month. But if you have to travel 5.1 miles to a gym, you go only once a month. Now, that is not the way most of us think about going to the gym, right? We think we go to the gym when we make a decision to do so and exert willpower. But what this study showed is that if a gym is close by, or you can integrate it into your daily trips, right? So you stop by the gym on the way home from work, you're much more likely to go. That's a huge effect. So situations matter. But the question with situations is always, well, is it self-selection, right? Do certain types of people end up in these situations? Or is it actually the causal effect of the situation? And some insight into this was provided by a quasi-experiment, a very interesting quasi-experiment that was done on survivors of Hurricane Katrina in 2005. 280 were evacuated and then followed by these researchers. Relocation in this case was pretty random. There was a lot of traffic congestion, so the buses couldn't follow routes that they were intending to. There was crowding in nearby shelters, so people really had to be evacuated long distances. When the researchers followed up these people 7 to 19 months later, what they found is that the people who had been evacuated to less urban, less pedestrian-friendly, more sprawling communities gained about 9 pounds. It's about 5% of their body weight, whereas a few were evacuated to places that were just as walkable as New Orleans, because New Orleans is a very pedestrian-friendly city, in the center part at least. Some of the suburbs, not so much. But from where these residents were being moved, it was a very walkable area. And 7 to 19 months later, they had essentially gained no weight. So this is a quasi-experiment. People weren't randomly assigned, but where people ended up was somewhat random. And the point is that if you change from a very pedestrian-friendly environment to one that's less so, weight gain happens. If you stay in an equally pedestrian-friendly environment, your weight tends to stay the same. So this is some evidence for causal impact of the context in which we live. So what key studies are needed to make progress in this area? Well, this is one of my favorite studies that I think illustrates how you can do interventions, behavior change interventions, really successfully or unsuccessfully. So instead of, it gives us an alternative to focusing on willpower and decisions. So the researchers were interested in this particular study in getting people to take the stairs. It was a 4-story office building on campus. There was an elevator. A lot of people took the elevator. Researchers wanted to know what would get people to take the stairs. So they started by putting up signs. Walk up the stairs, it burns more calories. No effect. They put up other signs. Walk up the stairs, it's good for the environment. Again, no effect. So what they did is something very simple. They changed the environment. They changed the context. They delayed door closing by 16 seconds, which puts a bit of friction on the behavior, makes it a bit more difficult to do, because now you have to wait for the door to close. It was delayed only those 16 seconds, and it cut elevator trips by 1/3. That's impressive. It's even more impressive in that at the end of the month, when the study was over, these researchers put the elevator doors back to their normal speed, and people kept taking the stairs. So it's as if they had formed a habit to take the stairs during the study, and they didn't change. That habit persisted. So what are habits? Well, habits are a kind of learning. They're a learning mechanism. Let's say you get a new coffee maker. At first, when you're making coffee, you have to make all kinds of decisions. You have to get the right kind of coffee grounds. You have to figure out how much, put in water, figure out how long it takes. But over time, as you repeat the action, it becomes more automated. You form associations between the context you're in and what you're doing when you make coffee. And ultimately, all of that gets folded into your morning routine. So you take a shower, you check the time, you make the coffee, and then you don't even have to think about what you're doing. You just do what is cued, what comes next. So habits form as we repeat actions and we get rewards in a particular context. We form context response associations, which are the habits. And you can think of these as kind of shortcuts. We're not making decisions. We're just responding as we did in the past to get a reward. Some of the research that I've done also suggests that all you have to do is perceive the context. And once you've formed a habit, the response comes to mind. And we did this with runners. We primed them with thoughts of places where they typically run and found that for habitual runners, that priming brought thoughts of running very quickly to mind. Interesting, personal goals for running. When we ask them, what are your goals? Why do you run? And they told us things like weight control or relaxation. Priming with those goals didn't bring thoughts of running to mind. It only brought thoughts of running to mind for people who were starting off as runners, because they have to activate their goals to get themselves out there, to get themselves working out. So to experience a habit, I often give this example of most of us can type really well on a computer keyboard at this point. But if I asked you to list the keys on the second row of your keyboard, many of you couldn't do it. I can't. Because that's the difference between our use, our behavior, and our understanding. It's the difference between habit and conscious awareness. We're not aware of what our habits are. We can do them, but it doesn't mean we understand them. And in fact, some of the recent work that I've done with an amazing student, Asaf Mazar, has shown that people underestimate their habits. We don't recognize how much we act on our habits. So that number, 43% of our daily activity is a habit, probably seems like way overestimating it to you. But that's because we misattribute our habits to our intentions, our desires, our goals, to our willpower. So what should successful future research look like? Well, I think we need to recognize the different psychological processes that are involved when we act on a single decision, do things once or only occasionally, as opposed to repeating behavior over and over so that it becomes automated into a habit. If we want to change repeated behaviors, and many of the important behaviors that we want to change in our lives. Becoming financially solvent and saving for retirement. Losing weight, becoming fit, being kinder to our partner, listening to our children, quit watching Netflix so much, not checking our phone. All of these are repeated behaviors. They're our habits. And if we want to change them, we need to focus less on willpower and goals, more on creating supportive situations that allow us to repeat desired actions and make it less likely that we're going to repeat unwanted ones. Because people form habits when they repeat actions that get them some reward in a supportive context. It makes it easy to repeat the action, and ultimately we do what is easy. So in the right situation, we can all form context response associations that work for us, that are beneficial, because we're actually forming these all the time. They're how our dogs learn. They're how all mammals learn. We form habits without having to think, just through doing and getting feedback from the environment that what we're doing is working for us in some way. So thank you. That's my conclusion, and I look forward to hearing the rest of the talk.